Okay, so I'm just gonna go for it since I am still kind of trying to figure out screencast. I apologize for any background noise. They seem to be doing some maintenance right outside my door. So, um, to begin with, the way I'm kind of going about this is I have this document that I'm using to keep track of all my notes and like immediate reactions to the sources that I've looked over so far, and kind of organizing them into sections. So that's what I'm kind of going through today. So where I started, since I really didn't know anything about Paul Auster, was Wikipedia, so that I could just figure out like who he was, where he was from, very like concrete details, and then get this list of his published works and like the different types of works, because there is quite a variety. So that was just kind of a helpful place for me to start out and get some basic knowledge. Um, then from there, I started to look at newspaper articles and reviews that I found, about different works from different time periods, general or just like about the author himself, and I thought that was really interesting. So, like this one is about, his story Ghosts, that I haven't had the chance to read yet, but um, it discusses his like the mystery novel sense of a lot of his stories, and then um, this one is basically just a gushing review about his historiography and, where's my notes, about his all the historical moments, and this guy calls his stories irresistible, which I kind of agree with. um, yeah, it's a very long but interesting review from the New York Times. And then this is probably the only negative review I've found so far, or like more negatively toned discussion on Paul Auster, because he really just doesn't like any of the tools that Paul Auster uses to write, which I thought was interesting and kind of provides a different side to my research that I wasn't seeing anywhere else. Um, and then this is about his brand new novel that came out in January this year, and how it's different from his past ones, and how it continues the same trends. And then this another article about his political activism, which I think is kind of an interesting part of his story. And then this one, I think might be an interesting insight, because it's from right after City of Glass came out the first time in 1985, and that's when there was very little experience with Paul Auster's fiction writing, and that is kind of it could be an interesting, look at how Paul Auster's works build on each other, and the more you read of them, the easier it is to understand. So this guy, just having read the only story that had come out at this point, there's a very different sense of who Paul Auster is as a fiction writer, which might be really interesting. And then, so like my next thing that I wanted to talk about that I haven't had a lot of time to look into very closely yet was my library research and like the full length books that are available on Paul Auster. So this entire book is about the idea of the postmodern quest and how much Paul Auster kind of plays into that, but also breaks that mold. Um, so he often does, this one has to do with the different, like human experience and fate and what quests have to do with that. And I would definitely like to read this one more closely. Um, this one is a lot about how he fits into postmodernism and how he changes pieces of postmodernism. And then this one is just a book of different interviews with Paul Auster, which kind of brings me into my next, like section of research, which is I found piles and piles of just interviews. So on NPR, I went through and I listened to a bunch while I was doing other research, and I found a lot of really interesting like information from Paul Auster about his books, about his writing process, and I thought that was really interesting, and will definitely inform my research moving forward. And then there are also newspaper articles written by Paul Auster or other kind of interviews that discuss a lot of different things. So um, I'm not sure how much time I have left, but after looking at all of these and getting a very wide range of ideas about Paul Auster as a writer and about his different novels and how they've changed over time, I have like a lot of I came out with more questions than answers, which I think is all right moving forward from here. Um, and so a lot of them talk about how much Paul Auster is influenced, or how much he influences European literature, even though he claims that he is trying to find the quintessential American voice. So I'm curious about why he is not as popular here as he is in Europe. Um, because I thoroughly enjoyed reading his work, and I'm wondering why other people are not. What's another one? I'm gonna look more into how his work has changed over time and how the reception of it has changed over time. Um, and is his most recent book called 4321 going to claim a spot among his greatest works, or is it just going to be one of those other random novels that not a lot of people know about? Uh, and then I'm very curious about um, how his personal life has influenced his work, because he's written a lot of memoirs. He's A lot of his books feature him as a character, or the character is based on himself, and they portray a lot of experiences that he has gone through himself. And I think one of the most interesting, like, he claims that he is using it to explore fate. And I found one quote that I think is really interesting from an NPR interview, that says, "I think I've done it because I'm interested in talking about what it means to be a human being, what it means to be alive. I really have no interest in myself. I find it a very boring topic, but what I'm interested in is to try to remember things from my life that will somehow connect with things that other people have experienced." And that's a quote from him talking about his a new memoir that he had written. So I think that that is going to be a very interesting like way to look at his work, and his um, how his different novels over time have portrayed history and portrayed historical events and events that have happened in his own life, um, and how that looks moving forward. So yeah, that's kind of my start for research. We will see how it goes from here.